Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last of 4 sessions of Returning to School with Equity in Mind. We are so happy to see you here with us today. My name is Kimberly Dickerson. I'm a postdoctoral researcher with Youth-Nex and the Equity Center, the two centers at UVA that co-sponsored this series. Youth-Nex aims to expand and apply the science of positive youth development to address societal challenges, and the Equity Center works to address racial and socioeconomic inequities in university communities like ours. We invite you to visit both centers' websites, follow them on social media, or sign up for the Youth-Nex newsletter to learn more about our ongoing work. I'd also like to introduce Leslie Boreen, the Assistant Director for Communications with Youth-Nex, who will be helping to moderate today's session. Before I introduce today's panelists, we have a few housekeeping notes. As a webinar participant, you are automatically muted. However, you can ask questions throughout the session using the Q&A option located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. During the designated Q&A time, which will be at the end of the session, you can use the raise your hand option and we will unmute you so you can speak directly with our panelists. We are recording this presentation and it will be available on our website tomorrow. Finally, if you're interested in receiving professional development credit for attending the webinar, you can contact Youth-Nex for documentation. You can email youth-nex, that's youth-nex @virginia.edu. Unfortunately, we're only able to offer documentation for live attendees and not the recordings. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists, who are all from local youth organizations, and they will be discussing their experiences with virtual education this summer. Kristin Edwards was the site coordinator for Charlottesville Freedom School this summer. She's a native of Charlottesville, Virginia. Can you wave, Kristin? There we go, yeah. She graduated from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University with a BA in psychology and a minor in child development, and went on to earn a Master's of Education in Educational Psychology Applied Developmental Science from the Curry School of Education. Kristin taught preschool at Jackson Via for the last 2 years, and this fall she will be teaching at Walker as a 5th grade English, Language Arts, and Virginia Studies teacher. Liesl Brucia serves as the Executive Director of STEAM Discovery Academy in Charlottesville. At STEAM, she oversees the partnerships, day-to-day operations, and family support, and created the leadership programs which use engineering and design challenges to teach leadership to students. She has over 17 years of experience in educational programming, spanning program development, operations, client support, and education content. Prior to STEAM, Liesl held a number of pivotal roles at World Strides. Most recently, she was the Associate Vice President of Global Academics and Operations for Higher Ed with World Strides. In this role, she oversaw the support of university clients with all aspects of their educational travel, from academic content to the program's logistical needs. And we also have Miller Marie Susan, who is the Education Director at Live Arts, and has taught drama and playwriting to local students aged 4 to adult since 2011. She's created and run classes, workshops, and camps at many local schools and community organizations. Miller has directed main stage productions at Live Arts and 4 county players, and her original plays and theatrical adaptations have been produced locally by Live Arts, 4 county players, and DMR Adventures. Miller grew up making intergenerational community theater, and it is her great joy to build theatrical company and spread theater love as an adult. So welcome to all of our panelists. So today's session will be a little bit different in terms of the structure. We have a panel discussion today. So I will be asking the panelists questions, and then please each of you have a chance to respond to the questions. Our first question, I know I just introduced you, but please tell us a little about yourself, introduce yourself, and also tell us about your organization in terms of its mission, its goals, and the types of education program that's offered.
Again, my name is Kristin Edwards, and this summer I had the opportunity to be the site coordinator for the first ever Freedom School that Charlottesville had, and as a result of COVID-19, it was virtual. So it was a 5-week literacy program that uses a multicultural integrated reading curriculum, and many of the books focused on like historical events and characters of color. So every Freedom School has a focus. So this year we focused on oral history, and the students had, or we call them scholars, had opportunities to become oral historians. So they could interview somebody in their family or whoever they wanted about the Black Lives Matter movement, or their COVID-19 experience. And then we also partnered with Kimberly actually to do the National Day of Social Action. So students were able to create posters and learn about the importance of voting. And they were able to come out with a poster that explored something that they would want adults to vote on their behalf.
Thanks, Kristin. Lisa, would you like to go next?
My pleasure. So I'm Liesl Brucia, excited to be here. So STEAM Discovery Academy was started 4.5 years ago, and our mission really is to give hands-on experience with STEM activities. We incorporate art, which is why it's STEAM, not STEM, because we think creative writing and creative thinking and design thinking are essential to innovation. It's also a great gateway to get students in who might be intimidated by the thought of a robotics or a coding program. And we can very quickly get them realizing that there's a lot of great things that come with STEAM, and get more and more students doing our programs. It's been particularly helpful with getting girls involved. From a few years ago, we've doubled the number of girls that we actually have moving on to robotics and coding programs, as well as drones, and have shifted some of the focus of how those work, where it's not always traditional battle bots. Sometimes it's learning to code and fly drones and synchronization. So we do that. Traditionally, we've been a program that was open only during the summer. We rented a few of the schools in town. This year, however, it was different. COVID definitely impacted us. And because of that, we used Camp Holiday Trails. And we also opened our own year-round facility, which we're really excited about in downtown Charlottesville. It's on the bus line, and we'll continue to offer programs year-round. In addition to the virtual programming, we did 7 weeks of virtual camp for students this summer.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Okay.
There we go.
Better? Okay, sorry about that. Rookie mistake. My name is Miller, first name Miller, last name Susan, which seems backwards, but it isn't. I work at Live Arts, which is, we're in our 30th anniversary season as a local community theater. Live Arts also, this is not something that everybody knows, but I want everyone to know. We offer low-cost, accessible, year-round, process-driven educational opportunities for children, teens, and adults. Our classes, workshops, festivals, audience talkbacks, and free volunteer facilitated groups offer community members the opportunity to explore all aspects of theater, including acting, playwriting, script analysis, improvisation, musical theater, and movement. And then we do lots of other stuff that we are, figuring out how to do this fall in our actual facility. But this summer, we transitioned our summer camp program, which is generally an 11-week program that offers full day camp experiences for ages 4 to 17. We offered it online. So we were able to move 10 weeks of that programming online. We actually are still not finished. I have 3 more weeks to go. Well, 2.5. Yeah, it's been a crazy experience. We usually have more like 350 campers and around 30 staffers, including arts administration interns and production interns. And this summer we had about a little over 100 campers and about 20 staff members. The move to the virtual environment definitely impacted our programming, but there were some advantages as well. Sorry, I'm outside. Now I sound like I'm in an airplane hangar, but as so many of you are, I'm sure, sharing your home workspaces with your entire family. I am doing that. And so I find sometimes that outside is, ironically, the quietest place that I can be. So that's why I'm here. Anyway, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And I know a couple of you already touched on some of the summer programming you offered, but can you tell us a little bit more about the structure of the programming? Like, for example, was it a week-long program that was offered different programs every week? Was it like 5 weeks long. How many hours per day? How many students did you serve? I know some of you hit on a few of these, but could you tell us a little more about kind of the context of your summer programming before we move into some additional questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump in here. So we offered actually two types of summer programming. We were able to do campus-based. It was a lift, but we also felt it was really important that while students need to physically distance, they need to be socially connected. And so we did offer campus-based programs, both full and half day. Our virtual programs, since that's what we're here to really talk about, we did offer both full and half day programs for that as well. Each one of our programs is a 1 week session. And the difference that was actually between our campus-based and our virtual was our campus-based are very, very focused. So you pick an area of STEAM that you're interested in, and that's what you focus on throughout the week. Our virtual programs were more of a survey, a broader base of it, but we use different activities to try and pull in all the different aspects of STEAM. So if you kind of think about, there's 5 letters in STEAM, each day kind of followed one of those themes. So, yeah. And to answer your question, we served about 50 students this summer. Some were repeat, but that's how many students we helped.
I can go next. So Freedom School is a 5-week reading program that was offered to students that were going to 3rd, 4th, or 5th grades who lived in the Charlottesville or Albemarle School District. So it was Monday through Thursday, and students logged on starting at 9:30, and depending on their grade, they would have either like a 30 to 60-minute reading session in which the servant leader intern or their teacher would like read a book, and she would ask them questions based on the book, and students could give their opinions on what was happening. So after their reading lesson, they would have like a short 15-minute break. Then they would have an oral history lesson. And that explained like what oral history was, why it's important, and the different counter narratives you might get in an oral history interview, as opposed to just reading the news. Then the servant leader interns would also have one-on-ones about twice a week with students. So they would spend time doing either academic work or just time to chat and get to know each other. And then I talked about this a little bit. We also had a day of social action class, and the students would learn about this, the importance of voting and why it's important to be like socially active in your community. And the product of that, like I said, was a poster, and the students created posters about the issues that they wanted adults to vote on. And a lot of the students talked about like police brutality. They talked about Black Lives Matter. And then, I mean, even they range from like talking about cartoons to something as serious about a student talking about how he lost his dad to police brutality. So we had 70 spaces, and by the end of the summer, we retained about 60.
So Live Arts runs, as I said, usually 11 weeks of programming for ages 4 to 17. This year we ended up doing 10 weeks. For the full day camps, which are for ages 8 to 17, we did still offer a full school day's worth of programming. So we started those camps or they're still going on. So we are starting those camps at 9:30. And ending the day at 3. It's broken down into the first sort of 20-minute period and the last 15-minute period of the day are shorter kind of ensemble building group meetings where it's with me and we just have fun, have free-ranging conversations. It's an opportunity for the kids to have more of a social feel. And then at the end of the day, we've been doing the Zoomies, which are counselor awards. And so the counselors for the camps also attend that last session. And then in between, we have 4 45-minute synchronous learning periods. So divided by either a 15-minute break or a 1-hour lunch. And then that's for ages 8 to 17. And then for the younger mini camps, which are all just a week in length, we did kind of a slimmed down version of that. So they're just half day camps. And they started either 9 or 9:30. And then each one of the synchronous periods is only 30 minutes. And they have fewer of them. And all of those are with the teaching artist and a counselor. And they have, we sort of flavored those a little more so that it was a little clearer to kids going in, like every day it's a consistent thing. So every day, the second period is crafting. We did craft in a box, camp in a box, which actually ended up being in bags. So camp in a box in a bag, pickups from the theater the Sunday before camp. And so that each camper would have a bag full of the same craft materials so that we knew everybody had access to the same materials to make puppets and crowns and binoculars and purses, all sorts of props and things. So we did sort of a crafting period, a movement period, read stories out loud in one period. So for the mini camps, we tried to make it pretty clear to campers going in exactly what they'd be doing. With the big kid camps, it was sort of more dependent on the focus of the camp. So we do like a Shakespeare camp, a comedy camp, a musical theater showcase. Right now we're in the middle of putting together a production of Shrek Jr. So those synchronous learning periods are sort of dependent on where in the process the campers are and what they need to get done for the online showcase. Our online showcases are mostly asynchronous, meaning like we record a bunch of things, put them through a post-production process, and then post a whole collection of links that can be interacted with at will and will live on. We did have one of our Fractured Fairy Tales camps, which was for our younger campers. We did have a synchronous, like they wrote a little short Fractured Fairy Tale play. So we had them perform that live for their parents and caregivers and friends. And we also recorded it and sent the link out for people who weren't available at the time that we did the synchronous presentation. But we've mostly done asynchronous so that, especially with music, obviously, well, not obviously, you may not know this, but you can't really sing and play music on Zoom because there's a latency lag. So any sort of product for a musical based camp has to have a fairly extensive post-production process. So it makes more sense to provide those kind of afterwards, after we've had a chance to work on them.
Great. So I heard like a combination of synchronous and asynchronous, different structures, different lengths of day, depending on the age of the youth. So when you're thinking about preparing for these different structures, can you tell us a little bit about the process of transitioning your typically like in-person programming to virtual and some of the considerations that you thought about when preparing to kick off these virtual summer experiences? Feel free to just jump in, whoever would like to go first.
I'll jump in, figure alphabetical order, I have to go first. So the way that we did it when we thought about it, and I think it's helpful to also say when we do half day, we have 2 meetings a day, so one at 9 and one at 11 with independent time in between. And then we have 4 class meetings for our full day programs that are virtual. One of the big things for us that we had to consider is we are very, very hands-on and we always teach through play. So we actually go to the toy fair every year and find what are the new toys that are coming out that they haven't even thought about using for education and how can we incorporate that into our programming. Which with that, one of our big challenges is that robots are not cheap. So how do we identify different ways? Similar to what Miller was saying, our goals were trying to get those into their hands. Our big things that we were considering as we did it, and I have an 8-year-old daughter and she did distance learning. I have a lot of mom friends. My husband's actually a teacher and was doing teaching online as well. So we kind of use that to inform us, as well as my background in international education, where we were constantly, my life was a Zoom call. So how do we collaborate across ways? And one of the things, you know, we had 3 big goals that we laid out for ourselves, and it was to make it engaging for students, to be able to deliver hands-on content from a distance, but also to make it as low touch as possible for parents. I know that just across the board, everybody, you know, we were lucky. We had the example of that was set throughout the spring, and we had, you know, feedback from that to be able to leverage, unlike our teachers who just got thrown into it. So we tried to take the best of what we saw that was done and leverage that in order to create that. So we started by identifying activities that we could do at home, similar to what Miller was talking about. And we created bags. So I actually even have an example of it. So we created a bag for each workshop that was labeled, that had what the contents were, that had the materials in it. In this case, it's a suspension bridge. So we even gave them a pail because we had a big discussion about who's got a book, who has this, and not having them need to do that, and wanting to make sure everybody was working from the same standpoint. The other piece that we really spent a lot of time considering was we created a toolbox, and it goes back to two pieces. One, we wanted to make sure everybody had the exact same tools to work with. We wanted to make sure that just because, our family seems to have a lot of that stuff due to camp, not every family does. I heard a lot of parents saying that we don't have poster board in our house. How are we going to do a project during distance learning? So we tried to remove that, and we actually put together a toolbox that included everything from a glue gun to liquid glue to tape, pencil, a notepad to work on, scissors, rulers. We didn't want the parents to have to look for anything in the house, and we wanted all kids to have an equal playing field. So again, it was, how do we make it hands-on and give these activities, but have it all contained, and everything came in our box that we did a pickup for weekly. And they'd only get the toolkit once a summer. But when we added things like bubbles, like we would insert the bubble solution into a bag. So everything they needed came to them. And that was really the big thing for us, was making sure that it was hands-on, and that we were giving that experience.
Freedom School also had the benefit of learning from what had happened in the spring and kind of planning around it. And we wanted it to resemble the in-person Freedom School as much as possible, especially because the in-person Freedom School is very energetic, it's very lively, involves a lot of conversations, and the students are even sharing books that the SLIs are reading. So prior to Freedom School starting, we sent out a survey asking parents, like, what is something that your child needs to work on, and what is something you hope to get out of it. And so we wanted to make sure that the servant leader interns were having like live meetings so that they were able to interact with the students, especially because we wanted them to build a relationship with students that they don't know. And we also wanted the SLIs to be able to meet with students one-on-one twice a week, just to make sure that they're getting to understand the students and getting to understand like the family's needs. And we also had our servant leaders reach out to the parents once a week, just to make sure that the program was everything that the parents wanted and expected out of it. We also provided supplies for our students. So we provided like basic school supplies, so like poster board, pencils, paper, sharpeners, notebooks. And then we also included like a water gun, and then like slime, and just some interesting things for the students. And we wanted to make sure that the classes were an appropriate length, just because it can be kind of, and I don't know about you all, but it gets tiring sometimes sitting at long Zoom meetings. And we wanted the students to be able to take a break, or even like do like a wiggle dance or a wiggle break with the rest of their classmates. And we also, part of the Freedom School way is having like a morning meeting, and they call that Harambe. That has like 6 components. So we have the read aloud, you have the motivational song, which is something inside so strong. We have cheers and chants, recognitions, the moment of silence, and then also any relevant announcements. And we would send that video out on Mondays and Fridays. It would feature different people in the community reading books, and it also featured like me and some of my coworkers doing the different components of Harambe.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Okay, so my big challenge going into the summer was that summer is when I make my budget number, basically. At the beginning of March, some of my camps were already sold out. I had about 3/4 enrollment. I really wanted to keep the families that we had on board. However, I could not afford to make the camps less expensive, because most of my cost is the stipends for teaching artists, which I certainly wasn't going to be paying them less money, since I think online teaching is just as challenging, if not more so. And I knew I was also asking them to do a lot of homework and extra work. So definitely wanted to pay them the same. And then I also, you know, the rights to the musicals that we did were not discounted. Thank you very much, MTI. So pretty much my costs were not that different, not having the camps in the building. So I really couldn't afford to charge less. So I really wanted to provide robust value and a similar amount of activity level and kind of childcare, as it were, as our in-person camps. So with that in mind, I reached out to, well, first of all, my son attends Tandem Friends School, who I think they did a really excellent job transitioning to online learning in the spring. So I definitely, as both Kristin and Liesl are saying, I definitely, being a parent was helpful, and you know, talking to other parents and other students about their experiences this spring was really helpful. And also this example from Tandem of this 4 45-minute synchronous learning periods, which seemed to work really well for him. So I was like, and that was pretty much a full day of school. So I definitely ripped that idea off. And the other thing that I did was I reached out to a large variety of city, county, public, and private teachers who are friends of mine or people that I know in the community or sort of friends of friends. And I asked them if they would mind sharing any materials that their various school systems had provided to them, like any sort of training materials or packets or best practices. And then also I asked them to please send me their top 5 tips for teaching online. Like, what were the top 5 things that they learned this spring, like that really were helpful to them, or what insights did they discover? And then I put together kind of a folder of learning resources for my summer staff for them to use. And also a lot of my summer staff taught online for me this spring. So they were going into the summer with a little bit, at least, of experience of teaching online. And I think we've all had a steep learning curve, learning some of the new tools and transitioning theater, which is not something that you might think of as working particularly effectively online. It's kind of antithetical to the nature of making theater. And so one thing we really tried to think about was that Zoom theater is not theater, right? It's this different thing. So how can we do this different thing as well as we possibly can? Because it's not bad, it's just different. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? So we've really tried to like identify through frequent staff interactions and meetings and lots of text chains and emails to each other. I also surveyed my parent population and asked them what they wanted to see. We've tried to keep the lines of communication really open with our campers, like what's working, what's not working. Yeah, we've just sort of tried to be really transparent about the fact that we're doing it for the first time and we're learning, and we would love feedback at every step of the process. Yeah.
It sounds like feedback and seeking feedback from as many stakeholders as you could was a common thing that you all did to prepare. We have a question that has come up. The question, I'm just going to read it. It says, how did you deliver the items in bags or boxes? Did you just drive them to individual houses? How did you communicate with families? This is a 2-part question. So the first question is, how did you deliver the items? Did you just drive them? The second question is, how did you communicate with families? Did you have a platform that you used?
Freedom School, so we went to the parking lot of Ruffner Hall, which is now Redley Hall. And we basically just had like boxes of books, and parents would pull up in their car and we would just hand them the supplies. And then, yeah, we didn't drive to individual houses. And how did we communicate with families? Primarily through email, but our servant leader interns might have used Remind, or they use text. It really just depends on what the best form of communication is for your families. But yeah, we mostly use like text messages and emails, and even sometimes phone calls. And we use, for our online platform, we use Google Classroom. But like I said, most of our communication was through some type of text or email.
We did pickups from the theater the Sunday before camp started in our lobby, and we're still doing them. We do one this Sunday, masked, distanced, you know, just come in and pick up your thing and talk from a distance, or we can walk things out to people's cars, but we didn't take them to individual households either. And we use primarily email, text messages, And we use the Google suite of tools. So, you know, folders on our drive, docs, sheets, etc.
Yeah, so like everybody else, we did a packet pickup. So we actually had, it was a large box, and we did it every Saturday from 9 to 11. Charlottesville Catholic School was nice and let us use their facility. We didn't go into the facility. We had a table set up outside, and students would pull up and we would contactless put it in their trunk. Again, full masks and everything. On the occasion that a family couldn't make it to that, we would deliver the boxes. We also had a shipping option. We shipped one to Baltimore, one to Williamsburg. So we did have a shipping option. It made us have to get our stuff together a lot earlier. So there's something to be said about that. But we did have that ability as well for families that were even more strict. For us, we as well used Google Classroom. Because we're not a technical school, do not qualify for Google Education, which was a step for us. It meant that we have to pay for every single seat in the Google Suite. But in order to ensure that there was, again, a consistent experience, we created a Google account for each one of our participants the week before. So they would pick up their box on Saturday, and that day they would also get their login credentials. So they would have, you know, their name at steamda.com, along with a screenshotted sheet of or email of, you know, exactly how to log into a different account, how to then log into Classroom. We had a video to walk them through it. So we tried to do it in a number of different ways, but email was a big one. I also spent a lot of time on the phone and texting with parents, and you know what, that's what I'm here for. So it did require, and I know we'll probably get to some of the challenges and how we addressed them, but it did require a very hands-on approach to supporting the families. So that way, the way I look at it from all my years of programs, if the students are physically, emotionally, and mentally in a great place and supported, then they can do their best when they're in the learning environment. So we just really focused on the person, and then we would deliver the content which we knew they were comfortable.
I just wanted to quickly jump in and add that our synchronous stuff we've done through Zoom, I had a generous donor who gave money this summer both for scholarship support and for teacher training. And I used the teacher training money to get all of my teachers Zoom Pro accounts, which for this summer was the absolute best tool and training I could give them for our programming. So
Great. We have a couple of other comments and questions. One was that there's been a request for the top 5 tips for teaching virtually. So I don't know, Miller, if you have something that's in a shareable format. We're happy
share that
to.
for sure.
Okay, that's awesome. We will post that on our website along with this video. And another question is, how did you create a balance of screen and non-screen activities for your students?
I'm happy to talk about a program we're doing this week. So we're actually running a specialty camp this week that's game design and mechanics. And we have a great partner, Doodlematic, that enables students, once they draw a picture, it's coding with color. So they draw a picture and their avatar is green and their hazards are red. They can snap a picture of it and take a photo and load it onto their, you know, tablet or whatever, and play the game, so they can actually create their own video game. So we created a camp around this. One of the things that we're doing is their morning activity is today they built a pinball machine. So we sent them a box, we sent them the materials to create a pinball machine and learn the mechanics of that. So that was the morning meeting, was discussing that, what's the science behind it, really making sure that we're giving not just an activity, but for us being a science camp, you know, the actual science of how gravity works, how force works. So we had a meeting about that, and then we turned the students loose to build on their own. I think today is a great example of this. One was more of a challenge for them. So our teacher was posting some videos like, hey, this is how I'm working through it. This is how, you know, we're doing it. And also made a big point when they logged off to say, I'm available. I know this is challenging. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions. So it's a little more hand-holding in that way, but it's not the full live instruction. Then the second piece of it is this afternoon, they'll have that meeting, but that meeting will then take what they've learned from the morning and leverage it into creating a paddle video game, mobile game. So they'll apply that learning and then they will be more on the screen. But basically having that captured time, being accessible afterwards, and then giving them that time offline to explore.
We really didn't want students being online all day. So for a third grader schedule for Freedom School, they might be online during their reading lesson from like 9:30 to 10. Then they got to have like a short break. Then maybe from like 10:15, 10:30, or maybe like 10:15, 10:45, they would have it drop everything and read. So they would all be online together reading a book, but no one would necessarily be like talking to each other, either just online, servant leader, intern included, reading a book. And then they might take like another short break. Then from 11 to 11:30 would be their oral history lesson. And then pretty much the day ends at 11:30. And then after that is when they will meet with their servant leader intern, if that's their day to meet, to talk about whatever they had discussed earlier in the day, or if the scholar had questions, or if maybe the scholar needed somebody just to talk to.
Yeah, because every camp is a little different for live arts because it sort of depends on what the materials are that we need to cover for the big kid camps. For the mini camps, I already sort of described how we, short periods, big break between periods, and each one sort of flavored with a different like movement focus or reading aloud focus or crafting focus. For the big kid camps, because for like a musical, for example, you teach choreography. So, a lot of the sessions are, my son is actually doing the Shrek camp. So I'm listening to him upstairs, like dancing in his room. Or sometimes they'll have kids kind of turn their cameras off and work on learning lines in preparation for scenes. To learn music, we've used a combination of recording, accompaniment and sending it via voice memo, and then having the kid record their voice memo and send it back to the teacher. So some of that is sometimes accomplished in a breakout room with a counselor or with a teacher during camp. Some of it is, we ask people to do it during lunch. They get a 1 hour lunch break or in the afternoon after camp. So we did have some asynchronous assignments for every camp, but for the most part, they would just sort of do whatever various activity during the camp with the long breaks in between. And I had sent out an online behavior pledge, sort of laying out our expectations for both their sort of behavior in the online environment, but also the importance of taking breaks from the screen, that we were putting those breaks in there, not for them to transition to watching TV or something during lunch, but to like close the computer and walk away during their screen breaks. So we can't ensure that every kid is doing that, but that was sort of the communication that we put out there with the campers and with the parents before, and caregivers beforehand, to just say, we are expecting that they will take breaks from the screen and we don't want them on there from 9 to 3:30 continuously.
Our next question is, what were some of the challenges that you experienced with virtual instruction, and how did you address those challenges?
Kind of piggyback off of what Miller was, I like the idea of having like an online pledge, because I felt like in the beginning of Freedom School, we should have been more clear about our expectations of the scholars, and not to be lying down when you're having a lesson, and not to be laying in bed or having the camera on like a pet, as opposed to yourself. But I think next year, probably being more explicit about our expectations, and just like adults have Zoom etiquette, children also have a Zoom etiquette to follow too. Another challenge is making sure that students are logging on, but part of that is making sure that the parents are aware, and like the servant leader interns are contacting parents and letting them know, your session starts at 9:30 and it ends at this time. But just making sure that the parents readily have their schedules available. And this kind of goes without saying, but technology is not always reliable. It did take a lot of communicating between Charlottesville City Schools and Albemarle County Public Schools to find a common platform, because CCS might be utilizing a lot of Google stuff and like Canvas and Seesaw and using Chromebooks, but Albemarle County might be using another platform and using like Apple products instead. So just making sure that we're all on one accord and knowing that like, okay, an Albemarle County student will have access to like a Google platform that CCS uses, and that everyone's able to use Zoom, but just finding a common platform, also helping families and parents navigate the challenges that come with being online and come with, making sure, can I mute myself? How do you mute yourself? Is my video on? Is my video not on? Stuff like that.
Yeah, very similar for us. One of the biggest problems we had transitioning was fear. As Miller referred to, we were tracking very much the same way for our summer programming, and being pretty much exclusively a summer program. It was a huge hit for us and a scary decision, which is why we actually made the call in April. And I feel like if we hadn't made that call as early as we did, we made it before the Easter break, we would not have been able to secure the materials that we did. Our supplier for craft sticks and all those great things, we placed that order middle of April and we didn't receive it till the first week of June. So we had to make that decision when we did in order to, again, minimize our costs, because otherwise we would have been paying full retail on everything, and it just adds up quickly. But the big one was fear. A lot of parents just felt their kids had spent enough time online in the end of the school year. They wanted them to take that screen break. They wanted them to, be offline and be outside. And that was a big thing for us to overcome. One of the big things we stressed was it's great to have a schedule. So having a reason to get up in the morning and having things to get done helps fill the time versus, they'll probably end up plenty of them on the screen anyway because they don't have a scheduled activity or an appointment to show up for. So that was a big one for us. Technical knowledge was huge. I think you guys have talked about making sure the platforms were the same. Spending a lot of time with families, coaching them through, it's the top right corner on Chrome, not the little icon, but the higher icon, and really walking them through that. And one of the things that both my husband and I have talked a lot about, and he's the academic director for our programs as well, is there's a lot of people who think because they use social media that they're tech savvy, and they're not. Like social media is not technology. Social media is a platform that people speak out on, but it's not necessarily technology. So when you ask them how to switch their camera on or off, it's something that we really do have to teach. We also teach nonverbal because in the classroom, students are used to just blurting it out. But one of the things we teach is the thumbs up, the thumbs down, the cheer for each other, so that way you can be engaged in that way. And one of the things that actually we're working on right now is putting together something for students that leveraging our leadership programs, which is success in virtual learning, modern leadership, because one of the things they're going to have to do is have that Zoom etiquette, and it's an amazing thing. And the way that we've approached all of it is these are life skills. When I was doing business in China and had to video with them, like I had to understand cultural differences. I had to know when was my turn, when was their turn. So what these students are learning is actually an incredible workplace skill. And I think if we realize it that way, that's not just a nuisance of, oh, how do we teach them not to mute? It's actually something that when I had new hires, I had to constantly train. Like it never ceased to amaze me how much I needed to train people to use a calendar, how to schedule a meeting, how to host a meeting and be prepared for that. So I think it's also important to frame it all as what we're teaching is essential, and it's going to be the wave of the future. Post-COVID, just because of an interconnected world. So really making sure that we were teaching that and teaching them those nonverbals to be able to do. And then the other big lesson is being very specific about what we're asking. You can't just, there's not a blanket statement. You have to be very, very explicit of exactly what you're referring to. And then also being comfortable with silence. I know that, Miller was talking about having the students, maybe turn off their screen, but still be connected. And Kristin was talking about having them read side by side, that instruction is key, but it doesn't always have to be active instruction. So finding those opportunities to stay connected and be a resource, but not necessarily be actively talking at them. But in our case, we would present a challenge and then build alongside them, even if we were not fully building the same way, or but we were going through the motions and modeling the behavior that we wanted, and then we were available. That if you end a task and you're like, all right, go, any questions? Well, they haven't gotten hands-on, they don't know what their question is. So giving them that opportunity by just quietly building alongside, maybe playing music in the background, something happens in the classroom, then waiting for them to get stuck, have a question and want to clarify, and having that accessible amount. Doesn't mean you're on for a longer period of time. We still cap our calls at 40 minutes, but being there. And then when you do log off, saying, I'm still here for you. And just like I shared this morning, our teacher's like, all right, like, I know this is challenging, shoot me a question. Because the second that student is brave, and it does take a lot of bravery. I know my daughter was very insecure asking for help when she first started distance learning, and we forced her because she has to advocate for herself. And again, that goes back to a skill that's going to pay dividends in the long run. That when they take that time, actually being responsive, it's not something that waits till the next class meeting. It's something that you can chat back, or you can say, hey, let's just jump on super fast and talk it out, and being accessible and helping them through that. So that way they're not getting frustrated, and then by proxy, their parents getting frustrated. So you have to support that entire package, particularly when we have students who are home alone. So.
Yes, to all of that. We have definitely, I'd say the biggest challenge that we have faced is that the format, just like the in real life theater camp format, which doesn't work equally well for all kids. The online theater format does not work equally well for all kids. Definitely younger kids, we find, struggle more, just with paying attention, with their, if it's a difficult task, like learning a harmony line, some kids are better suited to being able to essentially take charge. They do have to take ownership over their own learning environment and over their own learning. And for some kids, that's more challenging. We did, although we really wanted this to be an experience that was an actual help to parents and caregivers, that really not only gave their kids a sense of community and something fun to do, because as you say, they're going to be on screens anyway, at least that was my supposition for the most part. So we wanted to offer that to the kids, but then we also wanted it, if you had to work at home, for your child to be on a good schedule where they knew what they were doing and didn't need you to help every 2 seconds unless you had to reboot the router or help them with their computer, which we can't help about that. And we also have some kids who are home alone. So we needed the camp to work as well as it could with minimal, parent or caregiver interaction with each sort of moment in the camp day. And also, if you've got a kid for whom it's clear that really the problem is the format, it's just not working that well for them, we did lean on parents and caregivers, with frequent texts like, hey, it's 9:30. We don't see whoever hasn't shown up for this session. Anything we can help with? Like, can we help you troubleshoot a tech problem? Are they still asleep? Are you around? So I did do a fair amount of that. It's definitely not less work than the in-person camp. It's more work and more communication, and really trying to help both the kids and the families feel really looped in and really a part of this community. I think you kind of have to work twice as hard. So as much as we had hoped to really never have to bother the families, we are finding it's the best thing, and that often the parent or caregiver has the key, really understands, we can partner with them, and they can give us great advice about how to best reach their particular learner. And that's everybody's goal. So, we had to drop worrying about bothering people and just lean into we're your partners and we want this to be a great experience. We know you do too. So let's make it work.
Great, thank you. I see we have a couple of questions here, which are related to many of the things that you all just shared. One quick question is, there's a request for sharing your participants' learning schedule. So I don't know if each of you have like just a daily schedule from one of your camps perhaps that you could send to us and we could post on our website as a resource. Okay, great. And then another question that is closely related to your last point, Miller, is can you talk about the strategies that you use to foster strong relationships with your students virtually and also with the families virtually? So strategies to foster strong relationships with students and families.
Freedom School offered parent engagement webinars once a week. And then we also did movie nights once a week. So Dr. Harris would share her computer screen and we would choose a movie that was based on that had social emotional lessons in it, or something that we just felt like was very rewarding, like just a feel good movie. And I would work in the chat and we would chat with each other about what's happening in the movie. I would ask them, what would you do in that situation, or how would something like that make you feel? And then for the parent engagement webinars, we had a variety of them. One of them focused on voting rights. Another one focused on mental health during COVID. Another one was about, we talked to 2 pediatricians and they talked about the development process of children from 9 or 7 till 10. We talked about also being active in your community and also advocating for your child and trying to maneuver Charlottesville City Schools and Albemarle County schools. But I think the main thing was making sure we had live meetings and making sure the servant leader interns were consistent in meeting with the students. And also anytime we did pick up, we would ask parents, how's everything going? How's everything going with your servant leader intern? How are the classes? Are you having any type of technological challenges? Just also making sure that parents are aware that we want your feedback. We want feedback from your child. We want this program to be as suited for the families as possible.
I agree. It's a lot of communication. It's reaching out, soliciting the feedback, and listening. I mean, listening, absorbing, and then looking for ways to apply. One of the things I've found throughout my entire career, but particularly the summers, some of my biggest fails or what I think don't go well actually turn into my biggest wins in the long run. Because if you ask parents what they're looking for, they're going to tell you. And in a lot of ways, that's a great roadmap to work from. And so if you find that you have a kid who's, laying down or, maybe didn't make it out of bed and still called into the call, if you ask a parent, hey, what do we do about this? What do you think would be helpful? They're going to give you that roadmap. And then it's amazing how quickly you can apply that to Sally, just, all the other people down the line in it. So kind of creating that open dialogue. If I have a parent that had a concern, be it technology or such, making sure to follow up. So we address it initially, but then say, hey, reaching back out and just checking to see what if there's anything else, or feeling out the student during a call if they're on early or they're on late. One thing I don't like to do, and it was something I got sensitive to after it happened to my daughter, was somebody asked her to stay on after a call in front of everybody. And even though it was for a positive thing, she was embarrassed. So, one of the things that we constantly try and focus on is how do we continue to build confidence and build resilience? It's a big part of engineering. It's a big part of our programming. So how do we make sure that we're not putting the student in a situation that they'd be uncomfortable? So, Skyping them after, or texting them afterwards and saying, hey, can we jump on a call quickly, but not doing it in front of others. So that way they've retained their face. Yeah.
Yes, agree. Both of these strategies are super great, and I've definitely employed them. Kristin, I love the idea of parent webinars. Boy, that's a good one. I'm gonna remember that for future. I did a lot of staff interactions, like staff text threads, at least weekly, if not bi-weekly meetings with the staff of every camp, starting at least a month before the first day of camp, so that the staff felt confident and supported and really could be their best, most confident selves with the campers. And I'm kind of I try to think of myself as the person between the families and my staff. So I try to really foster like excellent communication back and forth, but I try to be the one sort of absorbing any blows that come and filtering that information to the camp, and also kind of helping staff strategize and solve problems when they're just trying to run a session and like a kid's not showing up, or they didn't do their asynchronous assignment, and they, that's my job, is to make that easier for the staff and to reach out to families and strategize with them and make it happen, which I've done with a variety of means, calling, texting, emailing, and then we survey after every camp, a pretty detailed survey, sort of asking for their long-term advice, short-term, feelings about how the camp went, etc.
Yeah, and just one other thing, I think we all have to give ourselves a break and recognize we can't be perfect all the time. I know, if you think about classroom learning and education, there are always going to be lessons that just fall flat. There's always going to be something that doesn't go right. You can be doing a chemistry experiment and it fails, and that's okay, and it's going to happen. The difference with virtual learning and the stress that I think we put on ourselves is there's kind of that person in the background watching. And so where if it's in a classroom, it's in the classroom, but if it's in a virtual classroom and there's parents around, we all feel probably an added pressure that, oh no, if this doesn't go perfectly, the parents are going to see it and they're going to be upset. And I think it's having that honest having that honest sense of it, and being able to say to parents, all right, or even saying on the phone, we had a heliflopper that we call, it was a heck of a flopper. I mean, it was supposed to be a helicopter and it was awful. And we just renamed it that. And we're like, wow, that one didn't go so great. And we're just open with it to the kids because they're smart, they get it, and open to it with the parents like, yep, this is engineering. Look how many, my favorite thing right now is how many rockets did Elon Musk blow up before he got people to the ISS. There's actually a really great video about that on YouTube where it's like how not to land an orbiter, and it shows all of the rockets that he explodes, and then him land one on ground, and then him land one on a drone ship, and like that's what it took to get there. And I think we need to remember that as we teach, we need to remember that as we interact with our students, and we need to teach our students that it's okay to not be perfect all the time, and to give ourselves some grace in that way, and give our fellow teachers some grace in that way.
So I love that. And I just wanted to jump in with a really quick story, which was my very first camp, a big kid camp of the summer. And it was my largest camp. So it was the first and the biggest. So we were really figuring stuff out in real time. 25 campers, which is a big Zoom. Mm-hmm. And I was putting them into breakout rooms to play a little game. And my Zoom crashed, and it crashed so thoroughly that I could not log back into Zoom for an hour. Mm-hmm. I assumed that meant that it had also crashed the meeting. But no, Zoom designated one of the campers the host of the meeting, locked me out of the meeting. The campers then proceeded to keep the meeting going for another hour. It was only supposed to be this end of the day little 15-minute thing. So they were all in there like chatting. I don't know, some joke was made. Luckily, I had one of the campers' parent is a friend, and she texted and she's like, what's going on? I never would have known. Mm-hmm. So then I write this mea culpa email to the whole camp and just be like, who knew? I didn't even know Zoom would do, I'm learning too. I'm so sorry. Like I tried to bring humor to it, but as you say, I just tried to be really transparent. I mean, I think people understand, as long as you're not defensive, I think people understand that things are just not always going to go right.
Exactly. Yeah, we had that happen the first week. We had students, because we used Google Meet. So we didn't use Zoom. We used Google Meet. And the first week we had students that hung on to the call. And they were just building quietly around each other. And it's something that we would check in on, because that is a worry zone for me. I don't want kids having, a full platform. Now, you can do it on their own, but they hung on the call and then just thought it would roll into the next one because it was the same meeting link, and it created 2 separate rooms. So we actually had and then we're getting calls like, I'm on the call, but there's no one here, and the educator's in the room, but there's other and so for us, we actually, and that's probably one of the things I really started using in Google Classroom was the ability to schedule posts. So you can schedule those. I'm sure teachers are very well aware of that. And I would do things like reminder, you need to log off before the next call. And some of those housekeeping that we cover at the beginning, I would continue to reiterate and have scheduled to, all right, everyone, don't forget, log off, we're gonna come back on, and use that as prompts to help create some of those behaviors. But it goes back to, we had to go through that to learn it, to be able to address it, and just keep the running list.
Yeah, thank you for sharing some of your lessons and mistakes, and the vulnerability that you were able to display and build those relationships through that. I think that's really important. We are right around 1 o'clock, so I just want to open it up for another question or two to take a live question. So I will hand it over to Leslie to kind of moderate that piece. And we also have one more question in the Q&A chat too, Leslie, that we didn't cover yet.
Yeah, so there's a raise hand feature on your Zoom screen at the bottom. If you're interested in speaking directly with our presenters, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you so you can engage with them directly.
And while we are waiting for that question, if anyone wants to unmute themselves, we have a question about the materials. So the question is, I know that many teachers want to provide boxes for students, but they have a lot of questions about doing that. Do you have tips for creating bags or boxes? Time, costs, manpower, decisions around what to include? Did you create learning targets first and then determine what to put in the boxes or bags? So let's do maybe a short answer to this one in case there's another question too.
It's a lift. I'm going to be honest. We were doing 20 workshops a week that had 20, workshop materials. So it is a lift. We identified the activities and what we wanted them to learn first, and then identified the activities around that, and tried to be mindful of what that lift was. We also then would, in some cases, if we didn't use them all, we could go back to them. So if we ran out of time, we had half days, there was some that we could go back to as well. But create an assembly line, buy more Ziploc bags than you ever think you're going to want. Uline, great supplier of Ziploc bags and boxes. But yeah, so I would say buy the bags, you're going to need them. And that organization, again, goes down to, it takes us a little bit more time up front, but it makes it easier for the educator while you're teaching. And it sure makes it easier for parents versus digging through a box. So having that contained made a huge difference.
Thank you. So again, any questions? There's a raise hand feature at the bottom of the Zoom. You're welcome to do that if you'd like to engage directly with our panelists, and we'll unmute you.
I wanted to quickly say I agree that it is a lot of work, the camp in a box in a bag. And also, if I had it to do again, and if I had all the money in the world, because that's the other thing, it was expensive, so I didn't do it for all my camps. I would do it for all my camps. Like, I think the older campers too have costumed themselves, and they've mostly just done it based on like this old headband they had, and then they've put some Shrek horns on. I mean, I think that's been really fun. They've enjoyed that a lot, but I would, if I had it to do again, I would provide that to every camper, because I think it was super successful and made the camp more fun and gave it a little more texture and community. The other things I saw, I think I didn't answer this question earlier, and I feel like that it was asked, which is how to foster virtual community among the campers. And I just wanted to quickly say, I think that the beginning and ending sessions of our days, which are pretty free form, where we just play games, we do a question of the day. I let the kids come up with question of the day. I teach ridiculous songs. I let them suggest games. I let them lead games. We've had these free ranging conversations around, the political landscape, stuff that's in the news. Theater lends itself to vulnerability and community building. And I think having those kind of less structured periods at the beginning and end with just the campers and me have been really nice for that this summer, to let people feel like they're still able to talk to friends and make new friends and engage on subjects other than learning their lines for Mackers or whatever.
Yeah, and there's some quick ways to do that that don't require a bag. I know my daughter got a whiteboard and a dry erase marker. They're $1 at the dollar store. And you can do so much with that. She could do live math lessons. But one of the big things we did with her friends to build relationships while they were closed was we'd have Pictionary night and charades night. There's a free website that's random word generator, and they have it for the games, and they could all use their whiteboards. They could draw together. And you can definitely do that kind of stuff in the classroom, that it's a simple, it doesn't have to be a bag with craft sticks, just even a whiteboard with a marker would work extremely well doing some of that.
For the Freedom School supplies, my tip, just make sure that, well, we already knew kind of like what the lessons we were going to be teaching, but just making sure that like if you're providing pencils that aren't sharpened, that you're giving them sharpeners, that like if they need a poster, that you're providing like colored pencils and crayons for the posters. But it was kind of time consuming. We did do like an assembly line just to make sure that each bag had everything that the scholar would need.
And I think some of that, like the toolkit, is even something you can band together with other teachers in your grade. So if you can find some of those efficiencies in that way, you can save money, but you can save time. I know my husband actually does something where they were able to get a test capsule into a weather balloon that went to space. So he did that as the science teacher. They had the English teacher have them write a press release, and they had the art teacher have them design the patch for the ship. So having some of that project-based, it's actually an opportunity to really do project-based learning that crosses the different subjects with the same materials.
Great, thank you. Two very quick last questions. One is a follow-up to the materials question. The question is, public schools often lack funds, and this year even more so. Anything else in a toolkit that could be cost effective? So just quick recommendations for anything that you found that was really useful and also cost effective. And then we'll end on one last question.
The notebooks were helpful. And you can find notebooks for like $1. And then I think the pencils, just like the basic school supplies, were just really useful to have so that students readily had them available. So if we said like, go get your notebook, like they already had a notebook that was exclusively for Freedom School and for their oral history project.
Yeah, we gave an art kit. So we gave one that had, the kind of simple ones that you can get very easily at like Michael's, that has colored pencils, crayons. It has like a little bit of paint, one or two paint brushes, that it's that one thing that can span so many projects. And our kids that did it for multiple weeks this year haven't exhausted it yet. So again, yes, some of those basics, and not assuming that families have things.
I'm also not gonna lie, I funded personally my camp in a box in a bag, so that's not sustainable. And that's a very public school teacher solution. So I really don't want anyone to do like I did this summer, but I didn't have that many that I needed to build. So, and I kind of wasn't sure if it would work. So I felt like I wanted to kind of fund that idea out of my own money. But that anyway, so no, I don't have any advice, and these bits of advice are good.
I can tell you how much a popsicle stick costs. We priced it out because we're a small startup. We had to make sure that we were being cost sensitive. But you'd be amazed how much craft sticks do not cost, as well as pom-poms. We also hit AC more hard when they were closing.
Great suggestions. Okay, one last question, and we'll just wrap up after that. The question is, did you have any students that did not have access to the internet or reliable internet? And if so, how did you accommodate them so there was equity in their experience?
Each student that attends either Charlottesville City Schools or Albemarle County Public Schools was given a Chromebook or I think an iPad in county schools. And if they didn't have internet, their home school provided them with a hotspot.
We leaned on that as well. We also were prepared to accommodate, a limited number of kids actually in the lobby of Live Arts as necessary, because there's nobody in the building, and I thought I could just oversee sort of a limited number of kids. But I think what ended up happening is that people who had concerns about that, like people in the county, often have really spotty access. I think a lot of them just didn't opt into the camp. because I was doing these full day camps that were like a lot. It wasn't just an hour, it's like all day. So I think that my format scared off some of the people that I was imagining I would be accommodating.
We had families that had access to internet and still just, it didn't work. Zoom obviously has kept coming up because it was a more stable meeting platform than Google Meet was for us. But we were in it and we committed to it. So we wanted it all in one place with one login. But we had to change our teaching style in some cases because of the lag. And again, it goes back to using not just verbal communication. So using the chat after we taught them not to write hello 100 times in it. So using the chat for actual questions, or the whiteboards, again, fantastic. You can hold up your question so that way they can do it. So leveraging some pieces like that. I do know we had a family that used a cell phone. So you can log in using your cell phone if you don't have Wi-Fi. It's not as ideal, but in some cases they just needed audio for us. We also posted a video after the fact, because that's another thing, even when you're doing live instruction, a student might not be able to keep up with the activity, particularly some of the craftier things, and they'll get lost. So we would post a follow-up video to help them and that they could go back to. So there was that availability when they could find a device to use, and then post a photo of it as well.
Second, the video tip, because the Zoom videos are actually small and they're easy to share, and they're instant. You get it right after the meeting. So we've done that a lot with choreography, is that we'll send a follow-up of the choreography.
Yeah.
That's a great tip. I want to thank you each so much, Kristin, Liesl, Miller, for participating today and sharing your lessons, your experiences, your suggestions and recommendations for virtual learning. This has been really helpful. Also, thank you to all the participants who joined us today to watch. We appreciate you also tuning in today. And this wraps up our series on returning to school with equity in mind. So thank you all again. We will be posting this video on our website, and we will also post the resources that we've discussed during this presentation today. So the tips for virtual instruction and also some sample schedules. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.